Oh my gosh, I thought Mario Bartiromo was just going to just jump and scream in enthusiasm. And same with Stuart Varney on Fox Business News and all the little dweebs on CNBS. It was expected that there would be 200,000 jobs created. The number came in, Ed, at 250,000 jobs created in the month of October. However, what they didn't say on CNBS or Fox Business News or in Bloomberg or Reuters is that there's a little fudge factor called the birth-death model. And of those 250,000 jobs, of those, 246,000 jobs were added to get to that figure.
Well, I'm going to jump in here right now and say that you just cannot, I say it every month. We talk about this every month without fail. And you just cannot believe any of the statistics coming out of the U.S. government now, and particularly the job numbers from the BLS. It's just not believable. And like you said, the birth-death model added 246,000 jobs. And even if that's out by a bit, the rest of the jobs aren't full-time, big-paying jobs. These are all part-time service jobs, bartenders, waitresses, and healthcare givers, and unfortunately not very highly paid. So when you take a look, drill down, you don't even have to go very deep in these numbers to realize that it's all smoke and mirrors, and the mainstream press is there to make sure that the public doesn't see that kind of information. But underneath the surface, it is worse than awful.
They're having a hard time keeping things together. And tell me if I'm wrong on this assessment, but the volatility in the stock market, down 800, up 400, down 300, up 200, up 400, down 300, down 400, down 500, down up 300. The volatility to me is an indicator that the powers that be, or the powers that were, are having a more difficult time keeping the reins on what's really happening behind the curtain.
Oh, there's no question about it. The stock market peaked, I can't remember when, it was 2 or 3 months ago or whatever, when we had our first big break for the Dow Industrial Average. And it's just been short covering rallies and just rip your face off kind of rallies like that. And then when real news comes out, the markets fall, and then somebody steps in and ramps them up higher, whether it be the plunge protection team or whoever it may be, or the hedge funds doing the dirty. The fact of the matter is that this market is totally broken internally on a technical basis. And when you look at the earnings and things like that, the market is just basically wants to lay down and die. But there are forces, like you said, in the market right now that are trying to prevent that from happening. And it's just a matter of when this whole thing melts down, not if it melts down, because the market top was in a while ago.
Ed, I want to turn to precious metals. And this is a topic that you discuss, Ted Butler discusses, and I'm not aware of anyone else that does. And that is this significant, I don't know if you want to call it, flow of physical metal that's been occurring lately.
Yeah, for the last since J.P. Morgan took over Bear Stearns back in 2011, the manic in-out movements of silver in the COMEX warehouses is unprecedented in all recorded history. It's just unbelievable. Sorry to interrupt you. Continue.
No, and of late, it's even escalated further, correct?
Oh, absolutely. It's just off the charts. I think 2 weeks, last week, not this Friday, yesterday, just passed, but the one before that, there was 14.2 million ounces moved in and moved out of the COMEX silver depositories. There are only 6 of them that matter. And, of course, the principal one's J.P. Morgan. And this past week, Ted said in his commentary on Saturday that was 13.2 million ounces this week. So in 2 weeks, there's been 27-point-something million ounces of silver moved in and moved out of the COMEX warehouses in the New York area. That is just totally unbelievable. I'm just trying to think of it. That's about 8 days of world silver production that was moved in and moved out. Ted doesn't know why, but it's something is going on.
So, and that's the important part, the something. What could that something be?
Let me just interrupt here. Something is going on, and the thing is that Ted's not sure what it is. He's looking for explanations, and nobody's got any. But I'll tell you right now, something is going to come to head, because this just can't keep up forever.
So, in other words, somebody wants their hands on physical silver.
Absolutely.
And usually when folks, big shooters, big players, this isn't mom and pop.
No.
When big shooters want their hand on physical silver, physical gold, it usually means something very large and something very negative is going to happen to financial markets, because when that happens, people go back to the things that have held intrinsic value for 5,000 years, that being physical precious metals such as gold and silver. Is that a fair assessment?
That's exactly true, and there's no question about it. It's my opinion, and I've spoken to Ted about this before, is one of the things we've seen, not only principally with J.P. Morgan, but with the other major players in the COMEX futures market, Morgan Stanley and HSBC, USA, Scotiabank, is in the last 6 months to a year we've seen just not only deliveries in and out of their own account, but just huge inflows into their clients' accounts as well, like we've never seen before. So, like you said, I get the impression that the insiders are lining their pockets with as much physical silver, and the institutions are lining their pockets with as much silver as they can. For some financial meltdown, I suspect that. Don't know for sure, but the fact of the matter, this physical silver movement that we've been seeing in the last 2 or 3 weeks, last 2 or 3 months, in the last 10 years now, is unprecedented in COMEX history.
And if we went to the vaults at J.P. Morgan Chase back in May of 2011, how much silver would we have found in their vaults, Ed?
Nary an ounce.
Okay. And if we go to their vaults today, how much physical silver would we find?
According to the COMEX futures market and the statistics they publish every day, which I have no doubt are the absolute truth, they have 150.6 million troy ounces of silver sitting in the COMEX warehouses, but they have much more than that. And
when you say much more, I believe Ted Butler figures at least the figure 700,000 or 700 million ounces, correct?
That number got bumped up quite a while ago. He was talking 775 a month ago. Now, with the deliveries from September added on top of that, I saw the word 800 appear out in his column. I think it was on Saturday. So let's put it this way. Between their COMEX warehouse stocks and what they're holding, probably at Ted figures they're holding it in London, another 700, let's call it 750, 800 million ounces. They've got close to 1 billion ounces of physical silver, and they're not accumulating it because they don't expect to make a profit on it.
Well, we actually had Helen Chapman, one of the best litigators in the world, on that's taken down a lot of Wall Street players. Actually took down Madoff, and she actually went after Jamie Dimon with J.P. Morgan Chase and being in collusion with Madoff. Earlier in the show, we had her on, and she painted a picture of him in one that this is a guy that's never on the wrong side of a trade.
No, not at all. I think they lost some money in the London whale trade, was it 4 or 5 years ago on that, and that sort of went sideways on them. But the fact of the matter is, in the COMEX silver market, if you don't specifically look at that, they have never, ever taken a loss, one loss in the COMEX futures market. And you know that when that's going on, that the markets are rigging. They're doing the rigging. But no, Jamie Dimon, J.P. Morgan, as Jim Rickards said, and he's absolutely right, he considers J.P. Morgan the biggest criminal organization the world has ever known.
And there's some things starting to seep out from underneath the curtain that I believe are of interest, and that is we have the President of the United States, Donald Trump, pointing the finger at the Fed, saying they're a problem. For example, in the past several weeks, quote, "I think the Fed has gone crazy," end quote. Quote, "My biggest threat is the Fed," end quote, says Trump, citing aggressive rate hikes. Quote, "My biggest threat is the Fed because the Fed is raising rates too fast and it's too," magic word, "independent," end quote. You know, Ed, I am not familiar with another president pointing the finger at the Fed, other than Reagan, who did it a bit, but not like this, as directly as this, pointing the
Kennedy
finger.
Kennedy did it, and you know what happened to him.
Well, that's true. Kennedy did, right? He did try to kind of end the Fed's game of their paper money charade.
That's right. He tried to take the printing press back into the Treasury Department where it belonged from the Federal Reserve, and we know what happened in Dallas, Texas.
So, Ed, why do you believe Trump is doing this?
There's a couple of reasons. First of all, he doesn't like interest rates going up because it certainly affects the economy. The bond market is getting killed, the corporate bond market. mortgage-backed security bond market, and that's not just in the United States. That's everywhere in the world. There's 10 or 20 trillion dollars worth of foreign liabilities that are denominated in U.S. dollars, and in all these currencies which are going down vis-a-vis the U.S. dollar, their payments are going sky high. There's no question about it. If the Fed continues on this rate without stopping through 2019, we're going to see a financial meltdown of biblical proportions in the paper market. And wouldn't be surprised. Donald may be a blowhard, et cetera, whatever he may be. He's no dummy. And I think he knows the real power and the real story behind the Federal Reserve, just like you and I and a lot of our listeners do.
And then as of Friday night, his administration, now the SWIFT system, tell me if I'm wrong, is a payment system that's based in U.S. dollars that all countries use to settle their debts, to settle their payments, correct?
Exactly, yeah. It's just a worldwide clearing system called SWIFT, and every country is plugged into it.
So now we have alternatives to SWIFT being set up so people don't have to use U.S. dollars. The Europeans are doing it. Russia and China are doing it, correct?
Yeah, that's right. I know the Europeans are trying to get around Iranian sanctions, and they're trying to set up some sort of system that would be somewhat comparable to SWIFT. And ever since Iran got kicked out of the SWIFT system, was it 3 or 4 years ago, Russia has been just going like mad, creating a new system. And they're more or less on stream, according to what Vladimir Putin says. And, of course, if they got any kind of payment system outside of SWIFT, they'll use it if they're absolutely forced to. And that's not good for the United States or for the SWIFT system.
So as of late Friday night, I believe, maybe it was Saturday morning, the Trump administration is now threatening SWIFT with sanctions based on their position on Iran. So
exactly, and they said, I think it was said in the press about 2 weeks ago that they weren't going to cut Iran off the SWIFT system. I read a story about that, and I had it posted in my column. I don't know what the source was, but it seemed to be fairly reliable. And then, of course, like you said, this story that came out on Friday night, where John Bolton says, the SWIFT system is not immune from this. They're going to be just tagged just like everybody else. Well, that was a real game changer. It really opened my eyes, and I put the story in my, I don't know if it's my Saturday column or not. But that was a big surprise. So I don't know what's going to come of it, but I can tell you right now, when things like this happen, countries are going to try and wiggle their way out of it and work around it, and that's what Europe's trying to do, and Russia, China, and a whole lot of other countries. So it's when you're an empire like the United States, the U.S. today, unfortunately, is not the nation that I knew when you and I were both growing up as kids back in the 50s and 60s. Mm-hmm. It has become an empire like the Roman Empire. And unfortunately, the deep state that runs it is getting way, way too big for its britches, and people are starting to run for the hills any way they can. And the SWIFT system, getting out of the SWIFT system is one of the ways they're doing it.
So let's play this out a little bit, Ed. If Trump is pointing the finger, rightfully so, I believe, at the Fed as being the source of the problem, and he's identifying them as being independent. So notice the mainstream media hasn't bashed him for that, because they know if they bash him for it, he's going to bring it out. Hey, look, folks, these folks are a group of independent bankers that just care about independent bankers. They don't care about the country. They don't care about the world. They don't care about American citizens. They don't care about the American economy. They are there for the bankers. That's what they are. This was created.
That's exactly what they're there for. And let me interrupt and cut in here. Is the fact is that most people, I would say probably 99% of the population, has no idea that the Federal Reserve is not a department of the government.
Right.
It is not related to the government. It is owned and operated for, and for the sole pleasure of the federal of the banking system itself. Every bank in the United States of any kind of size has a say in what the Fed does, and it has nothing to do with you and I or the people, and they don't give a damn about the people or the country.
And I think it's safe to say, Ed, that the Fed is part of the globalist syndicate, as you've outlined, correct?
Exactly. The biggest one. They are the head honcho, the capo di capo.
So if Trump is pointing the finger at the Fed, saying they're the problem, if this thing blows up, when this thing blows up, they're the problem, and now the SWIFT system is also part of the globalist syndicate, correct?
Absolutely. It's run out of Brussels, but the United States has an awful lot of say in it.
So if he's pointing at the Fed saying they're the problem, and now his emissaries are pointing at SWIFT saying, we'll sanction you too. Well, if he's pointing the finger at the Fed, and he's also pointing the finger at the SWIFT system. We're saying we're going to take you down too. That's kind of a double body blow to the deep state globalist syndicate, isn't it?
Well, it certainly is. And one of the things he ran on was an anti-deep state platform, and he's been sort of railroaded by them since he got into power, and he hasn't had much opportunity to stick a finger in anybody's eye. But you can see that this is his way of doing it and letting everybody know he's doing it. But there's no question about it. He's put them on notice. We'll just see what turns out from that. But there's no question about it. It's a real blow to the Fed and the SWIFT system, and he's on to them, and we'll just see what develops from
So, Ed, if his administration sanctions the SWIFT system,
yep.
Tell me if I'm wrong, but it's a way to blow up the system.
It is, but the thing is that they will carry on even if the United States isn't in there. They're just going to blow Iran out of there. And the thing is that the Europeans may or may not go for it, but there's no question about it. The SWIFT system will be in some sort of trouble if they really lay down the law against Iran this time, because the Europeans and the rest of the world just are getting sick and tired of it.
I'd like to quote something you wrote, Ed, on in Saturday's column. I believe it's very profound, and I'd like our listeners to benefit from your knowledge. Quote, "But underneath all of this is a worldwide economic debacle that's coming to a rolling boil. And it'll be interesting to see if this newly floated U.S. trade deal with China will amount to anything, or is it just an election ploy? The internal structures of most of the world's equity markets are now broken beyond repair. And it's only through the efforts of the plunge protection team and the hedge fund community that's hemorrhaging cash from all pores, that's keeping things on what appears to be an even keel. But out of sight, the situation is hopeless. And it remains to be seen whether this whole edifice crashes and burns all in one go, or dies a death by 1,000 cuts. It also remains to be seen if the world's central banks will do anything as these financial and economic events unfold, and if they do make the effort, will it matter?"
No, the system is just totally down the drain. The financial system, the monetary system, the fiat currency-based system. The reason Russia and China and a lot of other countries are now picking up gold hand over fist is because they can see the end of the fiat currency system, especially the U.S. dollar. And unfortunately, when the currencies go, the markets will go, and that's why I think that J.P. Morgan and the boys are picking up as much silver as they can.
Folks, we're speaking with Ed Steers. Ed Steers, I really would like you to consider subscribing to his newsletter. It's absolutely outstanding. Ed Steers, Gold and Silver Daily. It's the first thing I read every morning. It'll give you incredible insight and analysis. You know, Ed, you're really good at connecting the dots, and you're actually good at looking down the road and saying, okay, here are some things I'm looking at, and when I see these things occurring, I realize we're headed for a big crunch. When you look on Ed Steers' big radar screen of financial and geopolitical issues, from the paragraph I just read that you wrote this past weekend, what are you going to be looking for to see that the situation is actually continuing to deteriorate and that we're at a breaking point?
We've already passed the breaking point. We were past the breaking point when the Dow first broke below, it took its first break and then hit below its 200-day moving average. The correction has already begun. It's just a matter of how long process is going to take before we hit the bottom. And I know the central banks are going to fight it hammer and tongue, and like I said, will it matter? They don't have enough money to support the system now because they'd need 10 or 20 or 30 trillion dollars, and their credibility would be blown out of the water if they even tried that. So it's going to boil down to the IMF or total chaos. And like I said before, is that I turned 70 last month, and I'll be a very, very old man before this bear market breathes its last. And it's just depends how long it takes for them to hit bottom and how hard they fight it all the way down. But the fact is that the bull market is over, and we're just waiting for the end, which, like I said, will take a while.
You know, and I watched the movie, which is a great movie. I know you've recommended it as well, The Big Short, and I watched it.
Yeah.
I've watched it again.
Everybody should see that.
And I watched it again this past week.